Hi everybody, I've come to share a journal with you. This is for a private swap. It's a sewing themed journal, and sorry, this is about I think this is the third time that I've done this video, tried this video now. It is a traveller's notebook insert, but I'm not sure it will fit into a traveller's notebook anymore. This can be removed. It's lace bobbins. There is a vintage buckle and some beads on the side there. Got a little butterfly on the front, and I'm using charms down the side like Jibid Neary, lots of lace trim that NictheBookSmith uses, and there are charms on the bottom as well. I've left all the cottons, but of course they can be cut off if you don't like them. So we've got the sari silk closure that just ties shut. This is vintage lace from a dressing table doily, and it's also a pocket, so you could put different fabrics behind there and it will show through, which I thought was going to be really pretty. It's a cardstock cover that I have folded under the inside and stitched round, so it feels quite nice. This page, it has special delivery lace ribbon on it that I got from the lovely Brit, so thank you for that, Brit. And a sewing cotton, top of a sewing cotton reel. There's lots of trim, lined paper. This is part of the instructions for a sewing pattern, and everything in here is related to vintage sewing. There are no tags for you to write in, but lots and lots of pages that you can write on, but all of the ephemera is vintage sewing related, so that's part of the pattern. I've stitched on this fabric as a belly band, and there's part of that pattern and some vintage snappers there. I think this idea comes from Fiona J. Hi Fiona. This is the actual sewing pattern that I've sort of layered 3 layers and stitched those together. This is one of the little tip-ins, and that idea comes from Jibid Neary. No, it doesn't. That comes from Nazi from Amity Bloom. Again, lots of trim. We've got quite a large charm on some graph paper there. Music paper. This is homemade vellum, and I've done that by scanning some vintage, sorry about the ambulance, vintage doilies. I've scanned those and then I've printed them onto tracing paper. More trim, loads and loads of trim. Got a little fold out. This is a little tuck spot, and there's some vintage sewing thread in there. Got another charm on a paper clip. There's a little vintage fabric pocket that we've got more of that sewing paper in. Instructions. This is also a scanned vintage doily, and it's really lovely how it's turned out because you can see all of the stitching, so I really like that one. More music paper, more sewing paper pattern paper. And on the bottom here there is a little dangle, I hope you can see, a little there. Obviously all these threads can be removed if you don't like them. Oh, let's put paper clips over things. Got a little flip out here with the ledger paper. There's some more instructions for sewing. We've got a little bell on a garment pin. This was really full of vintage buttons, but I've had to remove some because they don't fit, and some vintage sewing paper. This is vintage fabric that has had a transfer put onto, ready to embroider, and that's never been done, so I've turned that into a little fabric pocket. Haven't put these in yet because it's not quite dry. Obviously I stitched round the fabric, and I've used fabric glue at the edge so that they will go into that pocket. We've got some fluffy trim stuff. And this is not vintage, but I just thought it looked quite vintage. So that's some sari silk on a little card. And this is an application to apply to subscribe to Women's Weekly that came out of one of the vintage sewing patterns. This is another little Nazi flip in, and I've stitched some gold trim onto the fabric. More trim on the other side. There's another paper clip with a bell. Here we've got another belly band and a vintage needle packet. That's the other side of that handmade vellum. In here there are some vintage fabric samples. I'll pop those in there. And this made me laugh. I bought this quite a long time ago, not knowing really what to do with it. And I bought a batch of cards, but originally somebody had paid 10p for this little set of buttons, which I thought was quite sweet. And there's another little fabric tuck spot with some vintage buttons. And inside there's some wool, vintage wool. It's 85% wool and 15% nylon, which I thought was quite amusing. So I've popped that in there. Got another little charm on a paper clip. This is one of those vintage doilies that I made the vellum from. And inside here, this was already folded, is a vintage transfer booklet, which would have originally had the letter B in. But I've managed to find some transfer paper with the letter P on for Preston, which is Yvonne's surname, and that's who this book's for. So that just tucks in there. More trim, more pattern paper. In here we have 2 more vintage sewing threads and another vintage needle packet. Not all of the needles are in the packets, but it's still really pretty. So this is the last page. So that's the journal. It did get a lot bigger than I expected, so I do apologise if it doesn't go in a traveller's notebook as it is. You might have to remove lots of stuff, Yvonne, I'm sorry. But I hope you like it, and this will be in the post either later today or tomorrow. So thanks ever so much for watching, and I'll link everybody below. Thanks, bye.